Dirt road in a gooseneck, saddle up with me. Dry land in God's country, crops far as I can see. The headlights on both ends of my heat day. This country life is for me. Ride with us, HPJ. Ride with us, HPJ.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Latsky, and I'm the Associate Editor for High Plains Journal. And this is our final virtual session of High Plains Journal's Cattle U. In this session, we'll hear from legendary cattlemen Mark Gardiner, Rick Pfortmiller, and Dave Nichols, all about genomic information and how we can use these tools that we have to make our herds even better. I remember walking through a pen of heifers when I was a kid and taking turns with my older siblings, giving impromptu reasons why we should be allowed to select a certain heifer over another for our 4-H project calves. Now, my dad had been taught by his father and his grandfather to evaluate cattle with a cattleman's eye. But today, we have at our fingertips data like never before. And harnessing these tools can help us actually back up our chute-side judgments or reveal hidden costs of keeping a cow in the herd despite her outward appearance. That's why we're rounding off our second ever Cattle U with these presenters. You know, as we've been putting this together, I've been personally thinking of this as a tailgate talk. Because remember when you were a kid and your dad and the other cowboys would lean on the tailgate and talk about cows? Well, this is our virtual version of that. And while we wish we could all be in person to share a tailgate talk and talk about these things, it's also somehow fitting that we're sharing this information that's going to impact our future over a virtual format. Rest assured, though, we are all looking forward to July 2021 when we can once again return to an in-person Cattle U, and we hope to see you all then. But for today, let's go over a few things. First off, we've already muted your video and your microphones. If you have any questions, all you have to do is click on the chat button below and a box will pop up and you can type your questions into that box. If you would like to ask your questions confidentially, you can always ask those questions to direct those to Jenny Latsky, and I will share those with the presenters when we're done. Of course, all of our sessions are being recorded, and the recordings will be posted soon after we're done at cattleu.net. The schedules of the sessions and speakers is posted there as well. So if you missed anything while it was being recorded live, you can always catch up with those later at your convenience. Now, we want to thank our sponsors for this webinar this afternoon, Neogen, and our sponsors for our first speaker, Mark Gardiner, Select Sires.
I think it's a dying breed to have a handshake relationship, and the cattle business still is done with a handshake. The relationship that I have with Select Sires, I really lean upon their knowledge. They have a really good representative that happens to be a really good friend of mine, and we were honored just in the last week to have 2 or 3 representatives come out here and actually assist us in breeding, and to be able to choose your people based upon their character and be able to shake their hand, look them in the eye. There's just not very much business today that you can do that with.
Thank you, Neogen, for sponsoring this session, and to Select Sires, who is sponsoring Mark Gardiner's presentation this morning. Gardiner Angus Ranch is a giant name in the Angus breed. Each year, the Gardiner family makes breeding selections for more than 4,500 head of Angus females and calves about 2,000 cows each fall and spring. Both registered and commercial Angus are settled by either embryo transfer or artificial insemination. In other words, no cleanup bulls have been used since 1964. Since 2008, genomic information had been gathered on all of the ranch's bulls, heifers, and commercial females. Performance data is recorded on all calves born on the ranch, registered or commercial. Steer calves are placed in feed yards, and carcass data is collected on all ranch AI sires. And since 1970, carcass data has been collected on all of the ranch's home-raised steers. This carcass data accounts for 43%, over 14,000 head, of the current American Angus Association database. Mark, thank you so very much for joining us today. And sir, the screen is all yours.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. It's exciting to join everybody today in a little bit of a different venue. And I can see Iowa Dave Nichols there watching. So good morning, Dave, or good afternoon. And Dave's one of my heroes, so I'm looking forward to his talk here directly. And so my sons would laugh at me as I screwed up the Zoom meeting or whatever, but we're all learning new things and learning new opportunities. And so I think with the title that I've been assigned today, with talking about how to apply genomic information, I think Jennifer's introduction about the tailgate talk, and around Gardiner Angus Ranch, we always talk about Henry's rules and the things that we have learned from Henry and Nan and how we apply those things. And so we're going to do a little bit of a back to the future, but before we get into some of the meat of the genomics, let's just think about those cattle that Jennifer was walking out with, and those cattle trying to decide. And we all know how to sort cattle. There's always the out cattle, the cattle that have structural problems or maybe a physical injury. Or ultimately, we might want to sort the ones that are too small off for selection criteria on replacement efforts, and we might want to sort off the ones that are too big. But other than that, let's say we've sorted those off and we have 100 head, but we can only keep 35 of those heifers because of that's what our resources allow, and we need to sell the rest of the cattle for cash flow, or it's a dry year and we that's all we can keep. So they really are going to look pretty similar phenotypically. And so I think if we'll look at these genomics and not be overwhelmed by them from the standpoint, it's a genetic cheat sheet. It lets us see what that first calf crop will be before these non-parent animals have ever had a calf at all. So I'm going to enter into the talk now, and we'll see if that'll work. When I think about the cattle industry, and I think about, there's obviously 90-some million beef cattle in the United States, but it's still a pretty small family. At the same time, it's a big family, and we have discussions and disagreements. And like I joke with my family, people say, well, how do y'all get along? I say, well, we don't. But at the end of the day, we need to get along to figure these things out and to move forward. And, this is so exciting that we have the tools and the access to the information that allows us to work together and to operate together and to be successful. So Jennifer mentioned our ranch, and we do have a lot of cattle, and we have a lot of cattle because I'm partners with my two brothers, and I have my twin boys and my nephew, and they're all part of the operation. And so all told, Gardiner Angus Ranch supports 10 different families. And so we do have multiple cattle, and we do different things with them, have 4 production sales per year. But we have to try to bring all these things together to figure out how we take this grass and turn it into the world's greatest tasting protein. And so when we look at that, we like to look back to the past. And Dad found this picture from 1898 on the exact same location that was taken in 2000. And how we apply that and how we utilize these resources, really, when I think about it, the more things change, the more they are the same, because we are ultimately trying to use God's resources to feed the world. And so I'm so excited and so pleased to be able to do that, not only with my personal family here at Gardiner Angus Ranch, but with the greater beef family. So when we look at that, this is my granddad, who he was born in a dugout in 1889, and my family homesteaded here in 1885, and they lost that place and 2 other places. And you think, well, that was a long time ago, but we just think about the history of America and how we go about change. And, on one hand, it seems like a long time ago, and in the overall scope of the, history, it's not very long. This is where my father lived until he was 7 years of age, and they lost that place. And, Dave, this is the grand champion Carlo de Steers at the American Royal back in the 50s. So we like to exhibit cattle also. And ultimately, here's Henry the boss, and we'll follow his rules and his leadership. And it's a family operation. And I would stress that cattle producers across the United States, we're all one family. So we need to work together to make the most of this protein that the world wants so much. So let's go forward, and let's go back to that dugout from the beginning, and spring of 1885, they arrived here. And so we lived there, and it was the Homestead Act from Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War's time. But ultimately, that's how we got here in 1885. And so when we look at that, there's Henry and Ralph, and how do you pass this knowledge on? Well, I think Jennifer did a great job sitting on the tailgate or walking through the pens. And I remember many a discussion, and I still hear Dad every day about what we should do, what we should think about as we go forward. And I think all families are that way. So Dad was born in 31, and we worked from that, and we lost lots of different places. And Dave, we're not out of the woods yet on this place, but through the years, with the help of our community bank and many others, we've been able to grow the ranch. And so here's my three boys, and they do the heavy lifting here today. But how do you pass this information on? Well, it's a daily process that we work to accomplish our goals, but harvesting the grass and designing cattle that are more profitable, not only for us, but especially for our customers in the seed stock business. We want to make sure that those cattle we sell have the ability to give our customers a greater chance at profitability. So here's the kids working calves and such, but our core business philosophy is always to produce the right product. And I often challenge producers and customers and other beef cattlemen. Our goal is to help our customers reach their goals. So if Dave and I are selling a bull, we need to know what helps our customers make money. But ultimately, when we think about selling beef, what does a consumer want from us? And I think we all know that they want that protein, they need that protein, but they come and buy beef because of its taste. So we need to think about those customers and their goals and why they actually eat beef. So I don't care what kind of a beef operator you are, anywhere in the United States and quite frankly the world, these are the core things that it's going to need to be able to put our customers in a position to capture that value. So here's some near and dear friends from us, for us that have bought bulls for 25 years now in a very, very tough environment in near El Paso, Texas. But these are the components that everybody's going to need in a beef operation. First and foremost, the number one production trait is reproduction. So we have to achieve that. Early growth, we have to have a live calf. So we have to think about things like calving ease. We don't get paid for the dead calves, and we want that early growth because that's the only growth that anybody gets paid for. So we don't want cows in our cow herd that'll outgrow the resources that we have. So we have to think about some limitations on stature and mature size. As I mentioned, our consumers want great tasting beef. So maybe sometimes we should think with the end in mind, designing cattle that will have that taste that people look for. So in product merit, and ultimately the maternal ability to replicate the process in whatever environment that we're working in. So let's think about all this, and we've got so many moving parts. How do you turn data into knowledge? And I can see Dave on there, so I keep referring to him, but that's been the holy grail my entire life. I mean, and I grind on my kids all the time about connecting the dots. We've got to connect those dots to take this data and turn it into applicable knowledge. So let's go back and let's take an old professor here and let's say a little bit about technology disruption. I didn't even know what that was till Tom Field brought it up one time. And this is the definition of technology disruption. But when we look at the beef industry and we think about all the tools that we have, we can disrupt technology by figuring out a way to make our businesses more relevant, more profitable, and enter into more value-added markets. So here's Henry, and here was our main breeding facility and our best breeding facility. And since 1964, we've been total AI without the use of cleanup bulls. And that might be somewhat novel today, but it was revolutionary in 1964. Dad had learned how to AI in the 50s, and by 64, he'd finally become confident enough that we could breed all the females that way. Kind of a side note on that, I've never seen an animal bred natural service. And I remember one night at the table, Dad had actually sold a bull, and he said, I sold a bull to the neighbor. I said, really, what's the bull do? He said, well, he breeds those cows. And And you have to remember, I'm at that point in time, I'm 10 years of age, and I'd never seen a bull breed a cow. And I finally think I was observant. And I said, well, how does he do that? Does he stick his leg up there or what? So we had that tailgate discussion about the birds and the bees, and been trying to figure that out ever since. But reproduction, remember, is the #1 performance trait. So let's look at that. And at that time, AI was certainly a disruptive technology. And this was our computer. And to this day, and they get mad at me, but we write everything down at least twice as we enter it into the computer, because we have to have backup systems. But our notebook and our clipboard was our computer. And because of this, we have created every animal here with the use of artificial insemination, and for going on the last 35 years through embryo transfer. So let's think about how cattle have been sold since the beginning of time. And in earlier days, I used to like to rope steers, still do, don't get to do it as much. But when I put up this picture, I think about cattle have different reasons for being in existence. And in general, cattle are a byproduct of land ownership or land access to convert that cellulose into beef. But when we think about it from the beginning of time and how to market those cattle, really until recent years, cattle were sold on a per pound basis for one price fits all. So in the early days, and even when I was in college and early in my career, getting cattle and upgrading cattle, let's call them mismanaged cattle, uncut calves from certain locations. And if we can get them up to the average price, that's the best way to make money. And so I think when you look at the advent of things like certified Angus beef and ultimately U.S. premium beef and grid marketing, and we can have various discussions about all those systems, but that started differentiating value. So that kind of reminds me of my friend Will Rogers. And you know, he says there's 3 kinds of men, and I'm certainly the latter, but you know, a lot of people can learn by reading. Some can learn just by observation, and I try to be observant, but I think the rest of us have to learn by doing. And so we have to kind of see it and be a part of it ourselves. So let's go through that, and let's see how we can actually identify these genetics that lead to added value. So when we look at sire selection and that total AI system, you know, Henry Gardiner would be the first to tell you that in the 60s and 70s, we had absolutely no progress. We were achieving reproduction, but we had absolutely no progress, no change in our weights. In the fall of 1980, we had the very first field data report of the American Angus Association. And I remember being in college at that time, and my dad said, you know, I finally know what we can do, what we're going to do. We're going to use only high accuracy progeny proven bulls from this field data report of the American Angus Association sire summary. And most of the other breeds released their very first field data report at this time too. But we're only going to use the bulls out of that sire summary. And of course, I was a kid, and I said, well, how do you know that that's right? Well, Henry did all these things, and he, you know, these EPDs, and that's a common term today, but these genetic predictions or these expected progeny differences, that was a new word back then. I said, how do you know these are right? Well, Dad went back and he took all of his records and he looked at his weaning weights, and we, in our system with grass and wheat and some improved sorghum sedans and things, we can have green grazing on a year-round basis. So we have these fall calves that we wean at 10 months of age. But that average weaning weight from 1964 to 1980 is 523 pounds. This calf represents that. This is a 525-pound, 10-month-old calf that we weaned off of our ranch. And we wouldn't have had the opportunity for our family to survive, let alone the rest of the family join into the business, raising 10-month-old, 525-pound calves. So I like to call this calf Mr. Pud T. Whacker. He's a shorty black. And Mr. Pud Whacker, it wasn't good enough. Gardiner Angus Ranch wasn't good enough. So when he looked at that and he looked back at his records, and I said, how do you know that these are going to work? Well, Dad took all the bulls that he used from 1964 to 1980, and he averaged up their EPDs. Now remember, this is a brand new database, so 0 is average. And when he averaged those bulls up, our bulls were essentially 0, 0, and 0 that he'd used in a total AI system. So what that told him was, if you do this, you're going to make no change. You're going to achieve reproduction, but you will make absolutely no change. And he saw that's exactly what he had done. And you think about it, and people used to say, and I used to say, well, Henry, you just picked the wrong bulls. And my point to that would be, and his point would be, he said, well, I did it the best way we could at that time. And the way he did it at that time was by, you know, the bull might have won a purple ribbon, and that's how we all got interested in exhibiting cattle. He might have won an eating contest at a bull test, and that certainly served its purpose. Or, you know, Dad's county agent was Dale Engler, and he had the Ramsey Ranch at El Dorado, Kansas. And Dale says this is a really good bull, so we're going to use him. But the point of all this is there was no objective way to select sires based on the economic traits of merit. Since that time, we've been able to make this change, to use this sire summary, and have these multi-trait excellence bulls. So here's LeBron and Mike, and I don't want to just be able to shoot the jump shot. I want to be able to go to the hole. So I want bulls that can do it all. And the American Angus Association and other databases have created cattle and populations of cattle that allow us to do that. So let's look at this. That fall of 1980, 526 pounds. 1981 was the very first crop of calves sired by those progeny proven sires. Now, we would say that it probably rained that year. That was a bigger jump than we would have expected. But ultimately, you can see we achieved in the mid 80s, we were approaching 800 pounds, and that became our goal, to have a 10-month-old calf at 800 pounds. And we first achieved that in 1988. And I've changed this to off-cow male weights as we produce more bulls. There's still 500 or so steers in there. This past year, our off-cow male weight was 914 pounds at 10 months of age. So we're trying to design cattle, one that fit our environment, but also that fit our customers and fit what our consumers want and need. So let's go to the title of this talk, you know, genomic selection. So think of it back to that original example of 100 heifers. I can keep 35. Which 35 do I want to choose? How do I go about picking the best ones? Well, that's where this really comes about. And so let's look at our donor selection from this past year. These 927 heifers, we take the traditional information from pedigree, from their performance data. That means birth, weaning, yearling, ultrasound. And this creates these EPDs, but then we add in the genomically enhanced EPDs, and we use you know, both GeneSeq and Zoetis, but to pick these. And so we are able to select the top 7% that are going to become donors with this selection. And basically, really, those cattle all look pretty much the same. And so I judged for Kansas State, Dave judged for Iowa State, and many others judged for other land-grant universities. And we could describe them physically, and we could look at them, and we can talk about those differences, but we really can't look under the hide like we can with genomics, and really before any of them have had their very first calf. So when you look at these data inputs, and we look about, you know, the simple things, I mean, what's the calf's identification? Is it a bull or a heifer or a steer? What's its birth date? Very typical weaning information, genomic information, you know, the parentage. This is how we go about doing it. We bleed these animals. We send our card to both Method Genetics and the American Angus Association, and we work to get this information. And we work a lot with Bill Bowman and Sally Northcutt at Method Genetics, and the reason for that is because they provide genetic information for the commercial cattle industry. And when we look at this, it helps both us and our customers make more informed decisions. And, you know, we look at all these combination of data from a standpoint of phenotypes and genotypes and SNPs, and we're not going to get all down in this. If you get anything out of this talk today, remember reproduction is the #1 performance trait, and remember that these evaluations are excellent and they work. And so if Mark would quit hitting the buttons, we'll go back to that and get to where we were. And So anyway, so these processes work. And so when we look at that and we think about it, and this is a near and dear friend of me, Joe Mayer, who's no longer with us, but when we look at genetic predictions and we look at what the American Angus Association has done from a seed stock standpoint, providing this information for us, I've always struggled. If genetic predictions are good for me, why in the world wouldn't they be good for my commercial customers? And that's what Method Genetics does so well. They take these genotypes from the commercial customers and they give them genetic predictions, EPDs. And oftentimes we look in the beef industry and we look at these bluff procedures, which is what sire evaluation is, best linear unbiased prediction. And we take that and we are able to see what the dairy industry has done. And that's what we followed in the early 80s and since that time. And once again, dairy led us with genomics, and they take that and they have done so well with it. And now we're doing the same. But in dairy industry, the dairy industry commercial tells seed stock what they need to do. And this is where Method Genetics has helped us so much by taking those genomics from our commercial customers, and then they can benchmark with us as a seed stock supplier with that information. So we won't go much deeper to that. And you've got all this information, all these traits, and how you go about doing it. And I remember Dr. Sue Denice years ago at a presentation, they were talking about these DNA selected traits. And I'm like going, you know, if we don't put this into expected progeny differences and into the information and the language we understand, it's going to take us another 20 years to get there. And that's what these scientists have done so well. And they can take this information, and the math is so complex. One, I never would ever be able to understand it, but we don't need to do anything other than to apply it. These things work. And when we look at these beef cattle selection indexes, here's American Angus, dollar maternal, dollar weaning, dollar feedlot, dollar grid, dollar beef. All these things go about to be able to simplify these decisions. So when we look at genetic trends and, you know, pounds pay the bills, I always say quality pounds pay more bills, but here back to 1972, all these different breeds, what are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to create more efficient pounds of beef. And you can see that as a group, these breeds and these beef breeds have been able to increase those weaning weights. And now we can do it even more accurately and efficiently with less trial and error. So the bottom line ends up being, to get these genetically enhanced EPDs, you take all of this information, pedigree, genomic results, performance, and data, to be able to get these predictive genetically enhanced EPDs. And so this to me is just so powerful when you look at the genomic impact on these genetic predictions. You know, I like to use the word a cheat sheet, but look at that chart right there. I mean, you can pick that heifer or that sire, and it has a progeny equivalent on that very first one of Calvinese Direct of having 26 head of calves before the sire of the dams had a single one. That is powerful information. If you look at the American Angus Association database for carcass traits, many of the sires have not had any carcass data gathered on those cattle. Well, look at that carcass weight, carcass marbling, carcass ribeye. And, you know, you're not ever going to get that out of those heifers if you're going to use them for reproduction. That is powerful, powerful information. So we can get with these genomics from, you know, 10 head to up to 36 head of progeny equivalents. That's good stuff. That's very, very powerful. And we've been doing it long enough now. It really, really works. So let's go about and let's try to select some bulls or select some animals. And how do we present it? Here's some commercial females that we've sold, and there's the EPDs and the various indexes that our customers use. Here's again just the benchmarking, and we look at the averages of all this and the minimums and maximums of where we are within a breed. And so I think the bottom line is that we need to think about genetics as another tool in our toolkit, as a risk management tool. So I want to take one of our customers and a real good friend of mine, Rex McCloy from Morris, Texas, and he wanted to access a lot of cattle. So in the spring and summer of 2013, he accessed 1,000 heifers, basically from OKC West. But he really didn't want all of those cattle for reproduction, so he used the genomics, and he picked 369, actually 400 head, and these are the ones that had live calves, the 369. And he did that by picking the top third from those cattle based upon their genomic results. And those were excellent cattle, as you can see when you look at their end product traits. They were 86% choice and just under 1% prime, but they were nearly 90% yield grade 3 or better. From that point, then, he took the upper third of those calves, and when you look at the 2016 calf crop, you can go about and see those 372 calves, and you can read as well as I can, nearly 100% choice, 26% prime, and yield 93% yield grade 3 or better. But the exact same cattle that were using those resources were able to yield back another $42,000. That's real money. So as you look at the genetics from an end product standpoint on these cattle, when we look at the marbling and the ribeyes, you can see the trend there just over that 3-year period where he was able to dramatically, 1, make those selections, 2, multiply the right ones, and 3, to make very, very important change and profitable change. So here's these same cattle going through U.S. premium beef, and you can see those sold in August of 2017, and they netted another $111 above the base price, or $8.19 per hundredweight. That's real money. So here these cattle are again, a little more broken down. They were almost all choice, and you can see the CAB and prime. But these were 8 outstanding cattle that he took from black heifers from OKC West, and over a 3-year period of time with his genomic selection, made cattle that were exceptional. So when we look futuristically, I know Rick's going to talk about some things that GeneSeek has, and they're going to introduce some new health genomic predictions, but everything from respiratory disease, all these different heritabilities, and this is opportunity. And a lot of the things that are hard to measure, genomics are going to allow us a great deal of success on that. And so, you know, it's in all breeds of cattle. Here's Charolais cattle, and just those heritabilities and the things they have, but it's universal, and it's being applied by all of the breeds with a great deal of success. So here's some things that Australia has introduced, and they're going to have an index based on health. And so futuristically, we're going to have to ease into this and learn how to apply those, but we're really just at the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we've seen nothing yet. So I really want you to think about a systems approach, not single trait selection, but this all has to fit together. And so when we think about cattle U and how we apply it, this may work at Gardiner Angus Ranch, and it might not work, you know, in Van Horn, Texas. But we think about what will work to have this systems approach in our own operation wherever we are in the world. So you think about, okay, you showed that $111 a head, but when we think about that genetic risk, here's a set of cattle, and this was last summer, really the market low. If you look at the $95 base price, you know, because of what they did on the rail, we were able to get, you know, substantially more for that. And sometimes those genetic risk values, I mean, basically it was $8.50 more per hundredweight because of what those cattle did. And so those cattle, because they were customer cattle, and we put quite a bit of weight on here cheaper, we were still able to net some money. We would have lost a lot more at just a $95 per hundredweight price. So oftentimes we look at this and we put it all back together, and folks say, well, that's just one pen of cattle. And so for the last 2 years, I've been charting it, and actually I received grid results on a set of cattle this morning, so I put them in there, and on 9/11 today, but this is on 9,000 head of Gardiner cattle, and you can see the head and the live weight, and you know, 98.5% choice and the prime and the market. But you know, these genetic hedges, I mean, these are exact same cattle, but because of what they were able to do and hit those targets that the market and the consumers demand, we were able to gross another $918,000, both for ourselves and our customers, which these are real cattle, real examples, real customers, and real money that over the past 24 months has been another $101 per head above the base price. So we look back from the beginning of the U.S. premium beef to today, 110,000 head of cattle have gone through there and netted another $11 million nearly for our customers through U.S. premium beef, which is $97.80 above. And so what makes us money, and that includes the genomic predictions, makes our customers money. And, you know, I have a saying that's probably some of you are about as old as me on there. So, you know, there used to be an old Jay Leno commercial that said, you know, if you'll buy these Doritos, I'll make some more and we'll sell those too. Well, if I can keep our customers in business and help them be profitable, then I have a chance to stay in business also. So when we look at this and we look about the genetic predictions, you know, if we can make some money and we can satisfy our customers, and that means our consumers too, this is a great way of life, and we can be very successful in what we do. So I'm just going to wrap this up with the fact that relationships matter. They really, really matter. And these are people in our world, you know, from kids to customers. There's our banker there, Kendall Kay. But don't ever stop teaching. These are some of the most educated people that I know on earth. None of these folks, they're the Zimmermans from Illinois. They don't have beyond an 8th grade education formally, but they have taught me more, and they do so much. So I can learn something new every day. And these folks in Illinois are very, very intelligent, and they've taught me so much. You know, don't be satisfied. Let's stay curious. Let's work together and let's figure out these things. And so ultimately, you know, my point would be genomics works, genetic predictions work, but it's about the people. You know, I grew up and all I ever wanted to do was be with cattle because I was this quiet guy and I understood cattle. But the reality of it is, it's people that matter. I love cattle to this day, but I've learned that you know, people are even more important, and cattle are the venue. And this picture was taken roughly, you know, 600-700 days after the Starbuck fire. And we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the people that came to help us. So it's been an honor to visit with you. I think we're on time-wise. I'll be happy to answer any question. But this is a great industry with great people, and we have great tools, and we can achieve things that my dad and your dad and that we've never dreamed of. We've just begun, and this is exciting, and I wish you nothing but the best.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate it. I tell you what, this was about like sitting around talking calves with my dad and his buddies. So folks, remember, if you've got questions, and that's exactly what we want, because we wouldn't bring these people to your screens if it wasn't time to ask questions. Click on the chat button on the bottom of your screen and type those into the box that pops up. And you can direct them to the general group, or you can direct them to myself. While we're waiting, Mark, I had a couple of them.
Good.
Because, you know, that happens to be my job, is asking questions. So
that's great.
First off, when you talked with Henry and, you know, making those decisions back in 1964, how scary was it for him to start in on using AI, to start in on using embryo transfer and really place his cowboy instincts in the data? Well,
I'm smiling because in 1964, I was 3 years old. So we didn't have those conversations, but, and you know, Dave Nichols and my father were great friends, and it was exciting for Henry. And, you know, I remember the discussions later when I was old enough to comprehend such. I mean, like many of you on this, I went to Kansas State University. Dad went to Kansas State University, and he was there in the early 50s, and the excitement for him at that time, that was the advent of artificial insemination. And he learned how to AI at Kansas State, and he said, you know, they'd use glass pipettes and they wouldn't go all the way through the cervix, and they were trying all these things. And I said, did you get anything pregnant? He said, not very many. But that was, you had to walk before you run. And he would get so excited. I remember that Thanksgiving, getting ready to come home in the fall of 1980. Mark, I finally know what we're going to do. We're going to use these high accuracy progeny proven bulls for the traits of merit. It's going to be awesome. It's going to work. I go, how do you know that? You know, and he's like, well, here it is. I mean, I took all these bulls from 1964 to 1980. I got all these records. It says we made absolutely no change. He was like a kid in the candy store. And when you look at the genomics and the tools we have now and the accuracy, you know, I didn't get into it, but we do a lot of embryo transfer. And we'll have, say, 10 full brothers or 10 full sisters. And when we look at the traditional data from birth weights to weaning weights to yearling weights to growth traits to ultrasound, they may not be very different. Well, I can't use and validate all 10 of them. Genomics lets me raise my batting average to pick the right ones to multiply. And so our success rate since those very early genomics, I mean, we picked a bull that in 1980, 2 bulls that many Angus breeders would remember, Progress and Profit, from genomics. They all had brothers and they all looked fairly similar. Well, because of that, and the other brothers got proven to a certain extent, we picked the right ones. They were the absolute best ones. So he would be charge on, move forward. This is exciting. It's not scary, it's exciting. And will we screw up just like Mark, who hit the wrong keys during the presentation? Yeah. Will we have wrecks? Yeah. But that's okay. We're going to learn from that too. We did all these research trials, and I'm like, Henry, we're pretty busy. We got to do all this and that. You know, we did a lot of them with what we call Uncle Larry Cora. And it's like, God, here comes Larry and all the grad students, and we're busy. He said, look, most of this research isn't going to work out, but we're going to be around great people, and we're going to learn something that'll take us in a different way. And you know what Mark Gardiner does now is we do lots of research projects with various people. We have lots of interns, and we get to work with great people to learn something and move forward. So he would be excited. I'm excited. Our kids are excited. And he'd say, let's get after it. Let's get to going.
All right. On that note, what new technology are you guys talking about in research projects? What's exciting for you right now? What do you think is the future that we're going to be talking about 10 years from now at the 10 years Cattle U?
You know, my job is to be honest on a daily basis. And the most honest answer is I can't tell you in 10 years what it will be. We're going to refine the systems we have, the genomics we have. We're going to keep improving on those. We're going to get these hard to measure things. I mean, we've done research projects, everything from validating milk EPDs, milking cows, to I have friends in southeastern United States. We did the southern carcass evaluation where we took a bunch of southern cows and mated them to Angus bulls to see, I mean, people would ask me, how much can I, if I use your bulls, change the end product merit of these cattle in one generation? Well, I didn't know. So we did a research project with another K-Stater, Tom Brink, who's a Red Angus today. We've done work with Tom Jones at High Plains Feedyard and on Grow Safe, measuring the differences. I mean, Dave does a lot of results on feed efficiency and things, but we did it over 120 some day period to analyze that on a set of steers. But my answer would be everything is going to be exciting, and I think we'll refine the health things and the traits, and maybe, you know, we talk a lot here about selection for calving ease, so we have a live calf, but simultaneously selecting against stature, so we'll be able to refine those things with those genomics, but all of the above and things that we don't even know about, Jennifer.
Okay. You know, speaking to Tom Jones over at High Plains, I remember having a conversation with him a couple of years ago about a project he was doing with those Grow Safe, talking about how we can maybe use genomics to create cattle that are not just more feed efficient, but when we start talking about sustainability. And if they are more feed efficient and we can get them to their harvest weight faster, then we can actually say that, you know, we have a sustainability message here because we're using less feed, we're using less water going through that corn. Are those some things that pop in your mind that you think about, you know, if it's not just about their weaning weights, but it's also about that sustainability piece of the puzzle at the other side?
Absolutely. And Tom and I have had those same discussions. And, you know, we feed primarily at commercial yards. Obviously, High Plains Feedyard. We feed a lot with Sam Hands at Garden City. We feed with Shaw Feedyard here at Ashland. And my friend Rex McCloy, we feed with Rex some. And I mentioned one time, I like to take a lot of these customer cattle, and between wheat and grass, we send them on feed weighing 1,000 pounds. And Rex kind of teased me, you don't leave much for the old cattle feeder there. And I go, well, he can have the last 400 pounds or so. But and Tom Jones made this quote, it's all about what our net is and how we get there. And actually our footprint, by using this cellulose that we can't eat, Jennifer, and getting them there, that's what's so beautiful about the ruminant animal. You know, I mean, I know we have pork and poultry producers that may be watching this, but we have a ruminant animal that can go out there and eat this cellulose and turn it into the greatest tasting protein in the world. So we have options. And so I've worked with Tom on that and others quite a bit. And I'll give you a fire story. We had a set of heifers that were open heifers, and they were scheduled to go to the feed yard the day of the fire, March 6, 2017. And that didn't happen that day. And, you know, when we ended up losing all those cattle, I said, let's breed them again. And so we bred them through another couple cycles to be able to replace some of those dead cattle. But the open cattle, we didn't have anywhere to put them, and so we had to keep them in, and we had to keep feeding them, and they were just on our grow ration. And long story short, the open ones there, they weighed 1480, and I'm like, Tom, we got a problem here, and I can't sell them from here, but I need to send them to you. They're ready to go. They're going to marble. They're going to yield. And they didn't believe that. Well, we need to do this. I said, we're going to change their diet. Long story short, they went to Tom's. They were on feed 19 days. They yielded 65.5%, and they were 73% prime. And all they'd ever been on was a combination of straw grass and distillers. They were at High Plains for 19 days, but you know, genetics works. And how they get to that endpoint, we have so many different options. And you know, Tom told me, and he said, you know, they're around and they won't yield. I'm going, look at them, they're fat, they will yield. And so that was, I think about it every day. How can I, you know, every pound I put on here, let's give me an opportunity cost of 50 cents per pound of gain. Okay. And I love these guys at these yards, and they're the best in the world, and these professionals. But the average cost of gain right now in most yards is going to be 75 cents to 80 cents a pound. And so they traded cattle at $1.02 this morning, okay, on the base price, on the cash price. Well, if I can put a pound on today for 50 cents, I just made 52 cents. And so when I look at that, keeping my cost of gain and my inputs, and I'm getting off in the weeds, and I can see Dave going to sleep there. Dave, you're getting ready to go. It's almost your turn. But I think about that stuff all day, every day, because it's opportunity. And I talk to customers about this, and I share that data with our customers. You know, that set of cattle this morning was just a wild percent prime, and that came from some local customers here. And I'm like, you can do this too. So it's everything and all of it, and it's exciting, and it's opportunity, and how do we get to that endpoint and to be profitable? And honestly, whether it's Henry or Dave or Mark or Tom or Sam, we can do this.
All right. Well, folks, any other questions from the audience? Now's your last time. In like 2 minutes, what's the one question that you get from customers time and time again that come out to the ranch and want to talk to you about cattle?
Which one's your best one? And I say, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I need you to define what best means to you. And so we're going to agree on that it's all these things we just talked about. but those folks in Van Horn, Texas might have a different way and a different animal that they need than, let's say, Terre Haute, Indiana. So how do we get genetics to your environment that gives you a greater chance of profitability?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Gardiner. And
Not Mark, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Folks, we're going to go ahead and keep going. But before we move on to Rick Pfortmiller, we are going to hear a sponsored message from some of our other sponsors.
To everything, there is a season and a time for every purpose. We are committed to be here through them all. Neogen solutions can be found at every link in the food chain. We are committed to providing solutions and support to our ranchers, our farmers, and producers who work relentlessly regardless if times are good or times are bad to supply our food. We are committed to providing solutions to our food processors and manufacturers, ensuring that allergens, harmful toxins, and bacteria do not enter our food supply. We are committed to providing security and sanitation to our veterinary community and providing needed animal health products for all our four-legged companions. Let us not grow weary or become discouraged in doing what is good and what is right. For at the proper time, we will harvest what we sow, if we are steadfast and determined. We are here, we are committed, and we will get through this together.
Well, now let's go ahead and bring to your screens Rick Pfortmiller to talk about Genomics, the new frontier in the beef business. Rick grew up on a livestock and grain farm in north central Kansas, where he and his wife and his daughters now live as the fourth and fifth generations on the land. They manage the family's commercial cow-calf operation using Simmental and Red Angus, selected for low input environments. They also produce milo and wheat and cover crops for extending the grazing season. Rick graduated from Kansas State University with a BS degree in animal science and has an extensive background in genomic applications in the seed stock and commercial cattle sectors. Rick, the screen is yours, sir.
Well, when you sit through this next session that I'm going to do, you're going to think I drove to Ashland, Kansas, and Mark and I collaborated, and that's not the case. But I can tell you, I'm going on 15 years now of doing this, and I distinctly remember I started in early '07. And when I first started, it was with Marielle and their Identity service. And I was in Dave Nichols' office, distinctly remember that. And I remember driving to Ashland and sitting down with Mark. And at that time, we were just talking about, genomics at the very root. This was before genomic enhanced EPDs. And I can distinctly remember in both of those cases, both of these gentlemen, we came away from those meetings agreeing that genomics it's going to be a part of the business going forward. Certainly, no doubt. So as I look at that, first, I would have to say, Neogen, on behalf of Neogen, we're honored to be a part of this. Certainly in this day and age of the C word, I don't even want to give it credit right now, so we're just going to say the C word. One thing, while lots of things have stopped and slowed down, if we go out there, our cow herd's still trying to move. Our cow herd is still going, and that's we've got to continue to do what we do because genetic improvement still needs to go on. So with that. Click through the slides here, and I wanted to throw this up and kind of frame this future of the beef business. And when we do that, think about, I'm going to ask you, for some of you that are in the agronomy side, and I know Mark, I know Dave, you guys have farming interests as well. And if we think about how this technology in the agronomy side, from what I've got pictured up there at the top left hand of a light bar that would sit in our tractor or our sprayer, at that time, when it first came about, it was just a series of red and green flashing lights that just kind of told us we needed to steer left or we needed to steer right. But it was better than trying to follow that foam blob that would drop out on the corner of a sprayer. And it had some efficiencies in mind. It allowed us to do some things. And then we fast forward then to the next part of that technology, and that was when that computer started taking a hold of the steering wheel. And it started to do some guidance for us. And in many regards, we talked about in that technology, we were sub-meter. So we were going to try to get it within 36 inches, but that was better than we were before. And then we started to dial in with better satellites and better technology, got to sub-foot, and now we're down to sub-inch. And fast forward all the way down to what's happening now. I've got the picture of the planter down there where we're now employing variable rate fertilizer. We're now planting multiple varieties in the same pass based on what the soil conditions. It's fascinating. And if I were in a live audience today, I might pick on them even more, but to ask Mark and Dave that if they were to go out to the part of their crew that is involved in that agronomy side and said, we're going to trade tractors and we really need to watch our costs. So we're going to take the globe off of the top and the screen out of the corner of the cab. Those folks on the agronomy side would say, Dave, Mark, put cheaper tires on the tractor because we need that technology. It drives efficiencies. And so we farm some. None of this equipment is a picture of my farm. But what I can tell you as I interact with folks that are on the agronomy side and in the cattle business, and what you've seen there on that little slide, that little show there with Neogen, we don't just touch the beef business that I just work in. We do genomics for the swine business, for companion animals, for eucalyptus trees, for shrimp. It is here to stay. And if I can leave you with one thing today, it isn't about a Neogen infomercial. It is that, and as Mark demonstrated in his slide, and I think Dave will allude to in his presentation, genomics is here to stay. It is a part of the beef business going forward, and you don't have to jump in full force, but there are pieces. Even if the only thing you do is you buy a genomically enhanced bull or use semen from a genomically enhanced sire that's in an AI stud, you are a direct benefactor of this technology. You are employing your light bar. You are employing your GPS to manage into this beef business. So I apologize for dwelling on that slide a bit and maybe getting a bit on a soapbox, but it is here to stay. So with that, what is genomics? It's a rapidly innovating field. Like I said, doing this now, going on 15 years, it is amazing where we have come from. And it's amazing. I think it's exciting to see where this is going to go. You can read there what we're doing, measuring the DNA and the follicles, blood. Really those two audiences that we're talking about, and really in my job as a territory manager in Kansas and Nebraska, I deal with these two audiences. One would be the seed stock industry, represented by those that are building those genomically enhanced EPDs. And then also I work with the commercial side, and we'll spend some time more on probably the latter part here in this slide than we will on the seed stock, because I think Mark did a fantastic job of carrying the weight there, how they've employed, and they really represent what's happened in a lot of the seed stock industry as they've brought this technology forward. So what is genomic testing? What does it do? And I think this, we talk about this, and I'm going to say this in more of a holistic sense, because us in agriculture represent such a small part of the population. And they hear the word genomics, and they're going to start to think we're doing something, we're modifying the DNA. And what we do as a genomic evaluation, as a lab, we're not modifying the DNA. We're just reading it, looking to see what it's telling us. And as Mark pointed out, it's a risk management tool. And we're not telling you anything about these cattle. In our case, we're talking cattle that time won't tell you. But you can assign, and we can demonstrate what is the value of time, and realize the savings and the opportunities that are in with this. So what are the real value drivers in this whole process? One, production. More cows having more calves. And by that, I don't mean a cow having more twins. I'm talking about cows lasting longer and having more calves in their lifetime. And really trickling that down, it's good kind of calves. It's calves that are more efficient, as Mark pointed out, in converting cellulose to great tasting beef. It is quality. We're all competing in the meat industry for a consumer's dollar, and in many cases, beef might be at a premium to something else laying in the meat case. And so we need them, if they grab our product, to have a satisfying experience so they buy it again. And those kinds of traits are embedded in so many of these genomic tools that we're using. And certainly I've got a graph here that'll demonstrate this to a degree, this idea of rate of improvement, what we can do. This is, again, back to that value of time. I only show this not as an inclusive list, but to demonstrate how the breadth of genomics within the seed stock sector. This is not all of the associations that Neogen works with. Some we are the exclusive genomic provider, and in others we share that role with other genomic providers. And I've got the logos there that for many of those breed associations. So for those of you that are watching, if you're a commercial producer and you are using some of those breeds or a combination of those breeds, more than likely you are a direct benefactor of those associations' efforts towards using genomics. I just put this slide there. And as Mark has indicated, and prior to genomic enhanced EPDs, we were using those tools of EPDs and prior to that ratios and one could argue even the show ring in a roll and physical evaluations. We all made improvement in those traits, but with genomics, we can accelerate that. And really it comes down to this concept of accuracy. And I so appreciate Mark throwing that table up there about this idea of progeny equivalence, because that is a really nice yardstick to use to think about how powerful a number of these traits can be. Now, we have to point out, though, that genomics is not a short circuit. It is part of the circuit in that we still need, and I'm talking about on the seed stock side, we still need, and we meaning the research community, the breed associations, and the breeders collectively, still need to collect that good phenotypic data out of good, solid, contemporary groups, because that provides a loop back mechanism then to further refine the genomic tools, and they work hand in hand. Genomics is not built to replace all of those tools that we have used. It just gains us greater confidence that those animals are indeed pointed in the direction that we want to go, and which leads to faster progress. And so we won't dwell a ton on this slide because I think Mark did a great job having that up there, and that was relative to the Angus breed. But other breeds have seen the same thing, that depending on the traits of interest, why that is so important. And the one thing I would dwell on this slide just a bit more would be to illustrate this idea of value of time. And if you imagined if you went to a sale this past spring, and you have a particular goal in mind of increasing the marbling in your calf crop. And so you buy a bull, and I'm not going to pick on any breed, you just go buy a bull who you believe and has no genomic data whatsoever. It's just an EPD. It's just some predictive tools have been employed. And you go buy a bull that appears to be better in marbling. So you take him home, and he's a yearling bull, so you put him with about 15, 18, maybe 20 heifers. And your goal is to see how well did I do in picking this bull. So we fast forward to 2021, his calves hit the ground. They've met our expectations in terms of birth weight and such there, but so now we take them, we wean them, we gather the data at that point. So now fast forward, now we're into 2022, probably mid-year if we did this as a calf-fed program. We're at mid-year of 2022 before we get reasonable carcass data on those calves. And one would argue maybe one calf crop wasn't enough because we need a lot of data to see if he indeed was pointed in the right direction. And lo and behold, mid-year 2022, you find out that he really didn't move your needle. Well, what did we do with that bull in 2021? We didn't mothball him. We turned him back out to breed probably more cows. He's a 2-year-old bull now. And he's probably out there breeding cows, getting ready to pull him back in after breeding cows in 2022. So now we've risked 3 crops of calves to determine that he really wasn't pointing in the same direction. So I use that illustration to say this is very real in what this technology can do to reduce that risk. So one of the pieces in all of these genomic tools that when someone sends a sample into our lab, or we receive a sample through a respective breed association and we're processing that sample on these, and we're not going to get into the weeds with these computer these DNA chips that we use and how many SNPs are on there. I'll just say on those DNA tests, many, if not all of them, now embedded approved SNPs or markers that can be used for assigning parentage. And where that's helpful, and again, my 2 audiences are seed stock producers and commercial producers. If I'm as a seed stock producer and we think about an EPD is an expected progeny difference that is calculated based on the sire and based on its dam. And if either of those halves of the equation are broken, he is not the sire or she is not the mother, and we don't know that, then that EPD has far less value because the computer couldn't make its predictions. The animal is really not what we thought it was. And that could be by fate. That could be by the neighbor's bull. We grabbed a wrong straw out of the tank. Somebody wrote something down wrong. So in the rawest sense, what genomics has done as it's moved through this arena of breed associations and EPD development has been to make that EPD better. And if we were to have stopped at that point and just not done anything more, we would be ahead of what what the challenges were being presented. And breed associations will tell you through their work, 5 to 8% of some of these matings are incorrect for whatever reason. So that in itself on the seed stock side is where parentage has really played a key role. But as you see here on this slide, this is data, actual data from a ranch in New Mexico where 8 bulls were dumped out with a large group of cows, and parentage assignment was then done. Might be kind of disappointed if 504 was a headline bull that you bought at a sale, and good old 405, he was one of those that you picked up at the end of the sale just as a, well, we're just going to get a filler, just in case something happens. And so that is where the parentage has really proved to be valuable as well on these commercial operations. Now, I am going to go maybe into a bit more of an infomercial, not to try to sell you on our products, but rather to demonstrate where this technology and how it's being adopted towards the commercial side of the business. Lots of these things that we've learned on the seed stock side since the first EPDs were rolled out in 2009 with the American Angus Association and Marielle, genomic enhanced EPDs. And I believe Simmental actually had one for tenderness prior to that. Lots of those things that we have gleaned and gained and learned in the industry and the research community has allowed companies like ours to now employ this technology to the commercial sector. So I'm going to focus primarily on heifer profiles with this slide, but just imagine you go to a bull sale, you go to Ashland, Kansas, to one of Gardiner's sales, and you buy a genomically enhanced bull, or you go to Dave's place when he's in Iowa and when he's doing his open houses to sell bulls. Here with this technology, you can now drive genetic improvement from the other side of the equation too. So, and as I pointed out with this idea of parentage assignment, those are things that are available. If those heifers come out of multi-sired arrangements, we can now attach that too. So honestly, about half of my time as I travel throughout my territory is really dedicated to working with the commercial sector and its products like this. Now I would back up, and I'm the slide prior to the parentage slide, I get a lot of calls in the spring from veterinarians and veterinarians' clients of, hey, we dumped 3 bulls out in this pasture and we've got some anomalies. We've got some bigger calves than we would expect, and we want to know before we turn bulls back out again, who's responsible. So even from a diagnostic standpoint, genomics has really proved valuable as a tool there. And again, it's here to stay. Just briefly, this is what when we talk about a profile, and I only point this out that when we run these tests, we run them, you don't order it and say, I want information on birth weight and marbling and calving ease. We're going to give it all to you on a report, and then you can pick and choose those traits that are of most importance to you. And honestly, I spend more of my time working with customers one-on-one, trying to identify what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and what are their goals. As Mark pointed out, there's different goals from South Texas to Terre Haute, Indiana. So this is the suite of traits that we offer in what we call Identity Beef, and have continued to do that. That product's been around for quite a number of years and continues to gain traction in the commercial world. I would say there's a couple of things I will be kind of rolling out, and again, not from an infomercial and expecting to sell, but to just demonstrate where through this genomic concepts, what we're starting to even uncover more. And here several months ago, we launched this idea of a product we call Invigor. that if this is run on a set of crossbred females, and when I say crossbred, I'm talking about not a single first cross where you took an Angus heifer and mated to a Hereford bull. We know what the heterosis is in that female. Because she's a 50-50, but it's whenever we use some reciprocal crosses or we use some composite animals in some type of a mating system, keep in mind genetics is still a lottery. You get so many genes from the sire side and so many from the dam, and what we have found, and we've run this actually on some calves here at my place. I had 2 red heifers, and one of those just through that lottery. And as she said in my intro, we've used a lot of Simmental Red Angus kind of composite, different variations. And one came back on our score of a 1, which is more closer to purebred, versus the other one was a 6, and she had got more heterosis through her pedigree. So what it is, it's a measure of the genomic heterosis. What it is not, heterosis is not heritable. It is only what exists within her that she has gained from her genes, and it is not. We know this, that you could have a crossbred animal that has 10 different breeds, and just because she's a 10 breed cross doesn't make her better than another heifer that is a 3 breed cross. We still need a good breeding program with defined goals. So it is not for everyone, but in vigor is one of our avenues that we've been able to glean from the genomic side. Just another quick slide on it. This is just a reminder to you that says these animals that have more heterosis can have some opportunities for increased fertility, lower cull rates, and more pounds weaned per cow exposed. These cows last longer. And in the feed yard, that does transmit to greater feed efficiency. And there's work that suggests that those calves have less treatments, less pulls when we have the advantage of hybrid vigor working for us. So certainly we see some merit in measuring it, and that's why we offer it as an option to our customers. Next thing that I would roll out, and this is fairly new, is moving into, to this point, we've focused on the seed stock side, we've focused on the replacement heifer side, and now this is really something driven towards the end product side, those non-select heifers and or those steer mates. What can we do with the information there? We're just launching, you'll start to see more about this idea of an identity feeder product. We see, particularly in my territory here of Kansas, some real opportunity there. Folks that are gathering up calves here this fall, putting them on wheat pasture, and maybe retaining ownership on some of them, and others moving back into more of the commodity stream. These kinds of tools can allow folks to peel back that hide, so to speak, and see what kind of genetic potential exists in those cattle of unknown origin, or just as we sort through what we have in our own herds, which ones do we want to focus more investment on and feeding, and others can we regroup them and market them in other channels. So, and I don't intend this to be an infomercial, other than this is just another extension of where this technology is going to move towards. Which kind of leads me to one of my last slides. Where's this headed? And Mark mentioned this idea of health management. If for some of you that are in the higher elevation areas and the challenges with the brisket disease, there's more work being done that we can evaluate these cattle from a genomic standpoint and see and manage that altitude disease. The BRD, as Mark pointed out, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of efforts that are being directed towards that. for a variety of reasons. One, it's harder and harder to get, new treatment protocols, antibiotics, and such into our hands at the producer level. And so we may need to be looking at it from the cattle side, from the animal level, to see, hey, who can take these environments and who can't. It's happening on the pig side, where they've identified certain lines of pigs that are more resistant to strains of E. coli, for example. So it just is, we are not stagnant when we start looking at things for health management, which leads to these feedlot tools. Some of that information may allow us to say, okay, we're going to feed these animals towards a never ever program or an antibiotic free or some type of a premium grid that has some of those criteria placed on it. Let's identify those animals that are more likely to make it through that, or remove those animals that are more likely not, and focus their efforts elsewhere. And we've sat in on sessions, we've talked about this idea of blockchain. And I'm going to draw you, when I talk about this data management thing, go all the way back to that first slide when I had that on the precision agriculture side and on the farming side. You had people that made the antennas and made the screens, and they built the hydraulics to communicate, and we employed the satellites. But without the ability to manage that data and to drive those decisions, I can tell you countless people that have a yield monitor in their combine, and the only time it makes any difference to them is they're driving across the field and they look up and they see the instant yield, and it says in that part of the wheat field it was 70 bushel, and on the other side of the field it was 43. But beyond that, they didn't do anything with the data. After they got done harvesting the field, they didn't use the data. That's so much the same what we get caught up in that on this genomic side. And I have customers who've invested in this technology for their heifers, and it's just sitting there. And we have to remind them, we need to use it. We need to use it, employ it, it works. So, and I think these blockchain initiatives, the technology is out of there. I think that's going to be one of the ways that we're going to be able to manage that. And I put those 4 question marks. Even being in this thing for 15 years, some of these things, I don't know if you would ask me this question 10 years ago, would I have predicted where we are today? I have some challenges. Folks say, I'm not going to get into this until it gets cheaper. And my response is, if you walk through our lab, and I've taken producer groups through our lab before, and in this case we had, I think this was several years ago, our heifer profile was $40, and it's quite a bit cheaper than that now. And after he went through the lab and looked at all the equipment and seen all the people and seen everything that was invested in that, he came away from it and says, I can't believe you do this all for me for $40. For my heifer that's going to have potentially 8 or 10 calves, so at an investment of $5 a calf, you're doing all of that data analysis. And now we've got the price of those tests are considerably less. And without digressing too far, I can tell you 2004, when Marielle first started down this genomic path, they were selling a test, a single SNP licensed out of Canada for the leptin gene, and I believe it was $65. Fast forward to 5 years later, 2009, Angus rolls out the first Igenity test for Angus, was a GEPD in 2009, $65. Fast forward to 2017, And our product, we rolled out Angus GS, which was an Angus specific DNA profile built for Angus, thousands of markers in it. And the power that it suggests through like that progeny table that Mark threw up there a bit ago, $37. So nearly almost half of that. That's how fast. So I look at that and say, where are we headed in the future? I think there's always going to be fixed costs to some of this technology, that the actual price may not come down to a point, but the price per piece of information will continue to come down. So, Jenny, with that, I think that is my last slide. There's my contact information. If we want to open up any questions or any kind of chat, that would be fantastic. But thank you very much for the opportunity, everyone.
All righty. Well, thank you, Rick, for sharing that. I tell you what, I learned more through being a moderator at these things than I ever did sometimes sitting in classes. And I'm ashamed to say that, because I think you guys might notice that there might be a K-State connection throughout this entire day. We did that on purpose. It's game day tomorrow. Folks, if you've got questions, remember you can type those in our chat box. Just click on the button at the bottom of your screen and type those in. While we're waiting for those, as before, I have a couple of seed questions or a couple of starter questions for you. Let's talk about that blockchain and that data management, because I remember one of my first jobs was writing down stuff at the chute side for my dad, and that's how I practiced my letters and my numbers. Fast forward, we've now got a whole bunch of tablets, and we've got a lot of other things. How can blockchain actually help us find and interpret some of this data and help us massage it? What do you think, as part of the industry, where can we go with that, and how can we use it as just cattlemen?
Yep, that's great. I think one of the things, what's so interesting on the blockchain, and I do not want to come across as a blockchain expert, is that we're now building the infrastructure is now starting to be built that allows multiple entities all along this pathway of where this animal could be originating at the ranch and the information we're putting there, to the backgrounder who's managing, buys those animals, all the way down to the consumer. I mean, all of that, we now have got a highway of information, and that's a simplified way to put it, but that has been probably the one area, as I've been in this industry and followed it, that I really maybe see that as the next frontier. And I kind of hold some envy at those on that agronomy side, how fast they took that kind of data that they were gleaning from the yield monitors to the folks that were out there gathering soil samples, to the folks that are like in Mark's country, there's irrigation, that all of those pieces seem to fit together a lot quicker on the agronomy side than they are. And maybe that's a bit to our nature as independent cattlemen. We haven't embraced those kinds, but I actually see our next frontier is probably going to be that information highway. Does that help, Jenny, kind of what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think you can think in the future, folks, you may have this calf that has been created because we've taken all this information from both parents, and we have the genomics, and we've created this calf that fits a need in a niche market, and we can actually trace them from the ranch to the feedlot to the rail to the package to the store to somebody's plate. And I know that sounds a little bit scary to some people, but if you think about it, at some point in time, you can monetize that. And yeah, if you're smart about it, you might be able to take advantage. I find that type of thing fascinating, but then again, I'm kind of a dork.
Yeah. Well, and maybe to build upon that is that I think this this technology will allow us to, as we've talked about value-added programs, we may see more discounts get applied to those animals that don't have those credentials for whatever reason, because of their genetic background or the way that they're not being managed. Those kinds of things may allow for a bit more separation in the value that is truly received. And but again, that's not any different than that what may be happening on the agronomy side too. So yeah, fascinating.
So remember, folks, you can send those questions in. You can either send them to everybody, or you can direct them just to me if you don't want to raise your hand in front of everybody. Let's talk about how can we use the genomic information that we're getting. How might we better tailor our feeding industry using genomics? We know how to feed cattle in Western Kansas. We know how to feed cattle in the High Plains. But how might we be able to just get a little bit more efficiency in there and do our jobs a little bit better and a little bit more quicker?
Yeah, I think and we didn't touch, I think you could probably put somebody on here that talks about this whole idea of nutrigenomics. And we hear this idea about the biome, the gut biome and everything going on in there, that genomics will be, that biome may be playing a role on what genes are being turned on or off. And there's a lot of work that's being directed towards those efforts. So when I talked in kind of a big picture side of things of taking this information and trying to maybe manage those feedlot cattle in a different way, that may be what we're talking about, is that some cattle are more prone to not being fed a certain way, when others, we could push the pedal harder. I mean, there's fascinating things done with hair shedding, environmental adaptability. Again, it is just fascinating where this. And so for those that are on, stay tuned. I mean, that's if there's one thing, that just keep your ear to the ground, but don't be afraid to jump in. There are different places that you can jump into this and start to learn. Get your light bar employed. Start getting some guidance from left to right.
Okay. Speaking of which, where does somebody start? Just how do they jump in? Who do they talk to?
That's a great question. So one, it starts with a sample, and that in itself is not intimidating. Mark showed a slide there of blood cards, and for years, hair cards. We pull hair out of the switch of the tail, and that yields really high quality DNA. Blood cards have been the gold standard. But here, what's so encouraging is Allied Industry, and I'll plug Allflex just because we use one of their products a lot. But Allflex has developed a little tissue sampler, and Mark had a picture of that it's a little applicator. In fact, Jenny, what I could do is share my screen. I think if I did that, I've got a picture of one of those applicators, and see if I can get to that here.
And while you're looking for that, we've got a question. What do you see for the DNA selection for the future on composite cattle while you're thinking that?
Yep. So the composite area, I mean, in one of the groups that we do a fair amount of work with would be IGS, which is International Genetic Solutions, that does the genomic. They're the breed improvement arm for Simmental, for Gelbvieh, for Red Angus, a number of those breeds that have got, by what they have done within their registry, they have built composite cattle. And so they have in their models, they've accounted for the various ways, the performances and such in those. So, when we build our commercial product, our iGenity profile, we actually released just the latest launch on that. We actually used a database that was built in collaboration with IGS. So we've got those kind of tools that you can account for. I will say there are differences between breeds. All the breeds have got the same genes working in them, but by virtue of selection over centuries, and I'll pick on Angus, they have consolidated more of the marbling genes than, let's say, Limousin. But Limousin still has those genes in there. It just isn't that they have pushed them for marbling near as much as others. And there's other breed differences that are out there as well. So to me, that's the beauty of genomics, is it allows us to kind of manage and account for these differences within these populations of animals. Now the one challenge, and this is a call I get quite frequently, is and I do not mean this in a bad way, but a minor breed, a breed that does not have large numbers, that in many cases those exist on small farms, or someone has a half a dozen cows. And I'm not going to name any of those breeds for sake that I don't want to get in trouble. But those breeds do have a purpose, and I do not dispute that. But many of those want a DNA, they want us to build a DNA test for them. And I'll go back to that slide that I talked about. We need lots and lots of phenotypes in order to train a genomic panel and identify where those differences are. And so I turned that challenge back around to a lot of times and said, this is great. Get us 1,000 of them that are all the same age, that are all fed the same, and we can build a test. And the really neat thing about how genomics has worked so well for those breeds has been on parent verification. Mm-hmm. Because now they've got the tool that they can say, this calf is indeed out of this sire and this dam. And some of those breeds haven't even got to the point where they're doing EPDs. They're still a breed registry. And so if that is the one piece that genomics can do, is to help solidify their pedigree, then that has real value for all of those heirloom breeders that are out there. So I hope that answers. I think it was Mark that posted that question. I hope that answered that. So okay. Here's just a picture of that punch that takes a little piece of meat out of the ear, drops it into that little vial. That vial is then sent to the respective breed association or directly to our lab. We have a number of robotic processes that we can process those, which means faster turnaround time. There's less contamination in this method than there is in pulling hair and blood cards that are getting mixed up on the tailgate of that pickup in a 30-mile-an-hour western Kansas wind. So sampling is not a problem. This does not slow you down chute side, but it all starts with a sample.
Okay. Well, thank you so very much, Rick. I appreciate you joining us today. And folks, remember, if you have questions that we weren't able to get to, you can always contact us, and we'll pass those on to our speakers. Now, before we move on to our next speaker, Dave Nichols, we want to take a brief moment to recognize our presentation sponsor for Dave, C-Lock Incorporated, and they will do the introduction for Mr. Nichols.
The main reason that we decided to invest in SmartFeed is because we needed a way to effectively identify bulls and heifers that are more feed efficient. And so having a system that allows us to measure intake in such an easy way is huge. And then add on top of that the method which it's reported to us, which is extremely user-friendly on the website, it just seemed like a no-brainer for us to implement.
At CLOC, we're working to help producers, industry, and researchers identify and unlock opportunities for improved efficiency, production, and sustainability. Based in Rapid City, South Dakota, our team utilizes cutting-edge engineering, manufacturing, and data science to provide multiple technologies to the beef industry. Our smart feed systems not only measure individual feed intake and efficiency, but also bring precision individual animal feeding, supplementation, and management to pasture and range. Our wireless and portable systems enable you to optimize and control individual forage-based animal performance by providing the right amount of feed to the right animal at the right time. So whether you're wanting to see real-time individual animal weight and performance from your smartphone using our smart scale, or use our smart feed systems to measure feed intake and identify efficient genetics, or save time, labor, and control supplementation to optimize individual animal performance, CLOC has solutions for deploying technology on your farm or ranch. To learn more about CLOC technology and what we do, visit our website or find us on social media. Well, hello everyone. My name is Ted Cunningham, and I'm manager of Beef Systems and Solutions for CLOC Incorporated. And today it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the 2020 Cattle U, Mr. Dave Nichols. Dave Nichols owns Nichols Farms in Bridgewater, Iowa, which is the largest seed stock operation in the Midwest with Angus, Simmental, South Devon, hybrid, and composite genetics. The Nichols Farms genetics have not only had a lasting impact on U.S. beef cattle genetics, but have also exported cattle, semen, and embryos to 30 countries. Dave's willingness to embrace innovation and provide leadership and contributions to our industry are extensive. Dave was influential in the Beef Improvement Federation and served on its first board of directors starting in 1967. Later served as BIF's president, and he's received the BIF's Continuous Service Award, Seed Stock Breeder of the Year Award, and the Pioneer Breeder Award. Dave has also served on the board of directors for the American Simmental and American Angus Association. In 2014, Dave received the NCBA Regional Environmental Stewardship Award and was also named the Livestock Publication Council's Headliner of the Year. He served on the Beef Cattle Efficiency Advisory Committee and as chairman of the National Beef Cattle Evaluation Consortium. Additionally, and I'm certain this is something Dave is very proud of, Nichols Farms has been involved with over 20 research projects with land-grant universities throughout our country, as well as the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center. In 2017, Dave's portrait was added to the Saddle and Sirloin Gallery, which is the highest honor bestowed in the livestock industry. I've had the privilege of getting to know Dave personally, and I greatly appreciate any opportunity I have to visit and learn from him. I thought I'd leave you with a quote that I'd found from Dave, and I know I've heard him say this as well several times, and I think it fits perfectly for today's keynote address. And that quote is, "My lifelong goal has been to raise 2 blades of grass where my dad grew 1, and raise cattle that eat less and gain more." CLOC appreciates the opportunity to introduce one of our industry's greatest leaders, so please help me welcome Mr. Dave Nichols.
Well, this is a great honor. I'm a little bit humbled by the words that was spoken about me earlier about by all the things I've done. So I'm going to go right into my slides. All right, this is our bull test station, and this is where we test all our cattle. This was put into we built this thing 54 years ago, and it's served us well. And I want to talk a little bit about our family. I was really impressed with Mark's talk about his family, so I've added this for Mark's benefit. I know what it's like to come in second to the Gardiner. So here again, I'm coming in second, but I do want to talk about my family. Nichols farms are not members of the landed gentry. 3 of my grandparents were immigrants to the United States. My mother's parents were immigrants from Denmark, and they met each other after they got here. My dad's mother was an immigrant from England, and my grandfather immigrated from Canada, although the Nicholses had been in the United States, but when the Declaration of Independence occurred, they went back to Canada, supposedly in a hail of bullets, but I doubt that. In one of the years of my great-grandfather, they were in Nova Scotia, and the codfish didn't come in, but the potato bug did. And so the 6 oldest sons got on a free train ride to Western Canada to shock wheat. They never saw each other again. My grandpa was working on a ranch in Canada that raised draft horses. The draft horses, he would ride in a boxcar to Omaha, and he would sell the horses in an auction in the stockyards in Omaha. While they were driving these horses around this ring, why his team of horses went crazy and went down, and he jumped over the side into the ring and went down and eared down the horses. Well, in Canada, white people, or I'll put it a different way, the only people that eared down horses in Canada were the Native Americans. So a man standing on the side of the horse sale was Wayland Hopley Sr., who later became president of the American Angus Association and judged the International Livestock Show twice. That was Wayland Hopley. And he came up to my grandpa and said, "Hey kid, you want to move to Iowa?" And he said he did, and that's how my ancestors got to America. I do want to tell you about my mother's family. My grandpa was a conductor on the UP Railroad that made a once a week trip from the middle of Utah to Sacramento and back. And he had a little 80-acre farm there with my mother, whose parents came from Denmark as well. My mom's mother died when she was 9. Her dad died when she was 13. She was in the middle of Utah, surrounded by Mormons, and the Mormons took her in and treated her just like they would one of their own. And my mother was a very quiet, caring person, but if you said anything bad about anybody of the Mormon or the Church of the Latter-day Saints, you found out that you really offended her. She sold the farm. She took care of the farm when she was going to high school as a 14, 15-year-old girl. And she sold that farm and the cows, the milch cow, MILCH cows, and the shoats, and took the money and went to Dana College in Nebraska, which was a Danish Lutheran college, and graduated 4 years later with a 4-year degree in accounting. My mother was not unique. That is what the greatest generation was all about. And if my parents taught me anything, they taught me the importance of communicating with people and leaving the world a better place when you left, when you died, than when I was gone. So I'll tell you one quick story. And Dad and Mom were on a dry land farm in Nebraska in the middle of the 30s. I was born in 38. And in 39, during this whole terrible, terrible drought. And Dad said, we got to move to Iowa where it rains, which they did. They moved to Iowa. Dad bought a 240-acre farm for $30 an acre, paid $3 an acre down payment on it. He did very well. He did very well during that time. And I remember two things, really remember two things in my lifetime. I'll say three things. The first one, when I was a very young boy, I heard my mother screaming from the back door. And she was crying out, "Merrill, Merrill, Merrill." And in walked, in there was two guys from the Ku Klux Klan. My dad, the only time I ever seen him get physical with anybody except me and my brother was with these two guys. He grabbed one of them and grabbed one of them by his shirt and the other one by his neck and pushed him out of my back porch and said, "I don't want anybody that has to wear a bed sheet over their head to ever be around me." I remember that vividly because I was scared and my mom was scared. And the next thing I remember was Mom, we had a phone line that you cranked, you know, it had 5 people on the line. And she stopped and she came out and she was crying. And that's the second time I seen my mother cry her entire life. And Dad went to the phone and one of her cousins, not one of her cousins, one of her dad's cousins had died in World War II. And she had never ever answered the phone again during the war when it was rung by the operator. Last story. And this one is what this whole slide presentation I'm giving is all about. I just barely remember after the war walking, we had a little country Methodist church, which we went to every Sunday. And and I remember there was cars there. And I walked and I walked and I walked because I was let's see what I was 8 years old. And we got there and what it was is the church to welcome home the boys that had been fighting in World War II, because this was 1946. The boys that came home from World War II. But believe me, they were not boys. But anyway, Dad came home and he always called my mother Mom. And he said, "Mom, I'm going to go to the bank and I'm going to borrow money and I'm going to feed 100 to 150 steers." And she said, "What?" "Yeah," he says, "I am. We've got 2 years of corn from 45 and 46, and that would feed those steers." The corn price in Bridgewater, Iowa in 1946 was $3.80 a bushel, which would be the equivalent to $38 a bushel now. And now this I can verify because the local banker told me this. Dad went in there and he said, "I'm going to feed the cattle and I need to borrow the money to buy the cattle." The banker said, "Are you crazy? There's going to be the greatest depression there's ever been in the world because all the world's, it always happens after every war, there's a depression." Dad said, "No, there isn't going to be that one this time," because I went to this church service and when we went there, all the boys that came back from World War II had 3 things. They had a car, they had a girlfriend or a wife, and they had a job or a full ride scholarship to Iowa State. And all the factories in the rest of the world are in ruins, and America's are all brand new. And the banker loaned him the money. He bought them for 15 cents a pound, and they were really Iowa Okies. And he fed them for almost a year. And I drove him home from my country school with my dog Jack every night to drive him home drive him home. And he sold them about 9 months later, let me go to the Omaha stockyards with him. And they brought $49.62, $49.62, and they weighed $16.80. He took the money, bought a $400, paid off all the debt on the ranch at home, bought a 400-acre farm that I live on till this day for cash, a new Ford pickup, and a new Ford car. And he taught me, plan for the worst, hope for the best. And if anybody is, all the people are running up the street one direction, you stop and you walk the other direction. If he says that they're walking up the street, why, you turn around and you walk the other way. And he says if they're all standing around, why, you just figure out what you need to do. And that's what this slide is going to be about, because I prepared this slide 13 years ago, and I've improved it every year. And interestingly enough, this is what I presented to the Neogen board of directors as an advisor to them 14 years ago. So here's the updated version of what Dave Nichols' plan is for the industry and for the next years. I don't see where I click ahead.
I think if you'll just tell Hayden to click ahead, he'll click ahead for you.
Okay, Hayden, click ahead. What's for breakfast? Well, when you ate breakfast this morning, or most of us ate breakfast, what we were really eating is we were eating heterosis, we were eating GMOs, and we were eating composites. GMOs are present in wheat, so that wheat can that's genetically modified organisms, as is all the corn and soybeans we raise that are Roundup Ready or whatever, all contain GMOs, which has enabled me to triple the corn yields that my dad had. Heterosis comes from the potatoes. All the potatoes that are at McDonald's come from growers that use special crosses of potatoes designed most exactly for potatoes that McDonald's serve. And I think their French fries are the best ones of all. And the bacon that we all eat, they're all out of composite, especially bred strains. Next slide. And the absolute necessity, the first thing that we have to do, and I believe this, that you need to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And this is absolutely a necessity for Nichols farms, and it's a necessity, I believe, for the seeds, for the beef industry as it exists today. Those farms, ranches, seed stock breeders, and industry who ignore their customers' real or perceived value and lack the guts or the tools to control costs are doomed to the trash can of history. One of the reasons that the swine industry is largely controlled by 2 or 3 companies that produce grandparent stock, which are pure lies, is because the hog industry refused to adopt the technology of EPDs, performance testing, and so on. A friend of mine from Iowa State, Lauren Christian, which was probably tried harder than anybody else did, and we run the wheels off of the pickup of Iowa State's visiting the swine producers, breeders, and so on, saying they had to keep records and so on. And they had all the reasons why they couldn't do it because of litter size and so on. And so now the swine industry is largely a corporate genetic company. And I'm not opposed to that, but I don't want to see the cattle business do that simply because I believe the capitalism system, who creates people like the Gardiners and people like my dad, and I'll just say one thing to Mark: if your dad and my dad were the same age and got together, they would have ruled the world. Next slide. This is a reality check, and this is something that has changed our selection and our goals in the last, especially the last 7 or 8 years, and that's the metabolizable energy required of the parent population and growth of the slaughter generation per pound of carcass weight per year. And here you see in the cattle business, over half of the cost of beef or pork is proportional to the cost of the dam. When you eat a steak or a hamburger, almost 65% of the cost of that steak is for maintenance of the cow herd. And that's because of reproductive efficiency. In broilers, it's almost done. In turkeys, it's almost done. But you can see by the graph, the biological efficiency and relative competitiveness of beef, pork, and poultry production, the vision for the future. And this came out in '92. Now, what my dream is to, as far as the cow is concerned, is we have a cow in America that is really one of the most misunderstood cows there is. And that's the tiger stripe cow. That's the Hereford Brahman cross. That cow will have 20 to 25 calves in her lifetime. All you have to do is buy your bred heifers twice in your lifetime. But that's an example of, that's not really heterosis, that's a mule. But I think that that is a goal for the younger people to get that accomplished in our English breeds that are suited for the North, because we have to have a goal, and my goals are always lofty, and I don't worry about the ones I don't meet. I worry when I get to worrying about I'm not trying. Next slide. Now here's one thing that is the reality. This is a reality check, and I have the old original scale. My brother and I, a brass scale that we have hanging in our conference room, and the sign above it is what my dad told me. They all sell weight times the money. So feeder calves, yearlings, finished cattle, carcass beef, retail beef, Big Mac hamburgers, prime steaks, and lobsters at white table restaurants are all sold weight times the money. I don't know, anytime when I go in and I buy a chicken breast that comes off of a 3 pound, or is a 1 pound breast or anything, but it's, so these premier foods, these foods that commands the highest prices and are the best eaten according to the consumers the world over, by the way, because we've exported semen and cattle to 20 foreign countries, and there's a couple of them that I wish we never had done it. But anyway, if you, my dad always said, if you're selecting for something besides weight times the money, you're probably going to end up being wrong. Next slide. Select for rapid early growth. Cattle grow slowly, 0.2% to 0.6% of body weight per day, compared with broilers that's 3 to 20% weight per day. That's how fast that a broiler is growing 150% faster, gaining 150% faster on his weight compared to his gain. So in essence, is they're increasing the relative rate of gain and harvesting at younger ages, increase the efficiency of beef production. Next slide. The Angus Association was one of the leaders early on in understanding relative growth. This is just growth relative to the size of the body weight of the animal. So we've been selecting for RADG EPD with the same, since it came out many years ago, we've put as much value in that as we have yearling weight. And that's not nearly as actually measuring feed intake and so on, but we do measure feed efficiency on all our cattle by pen. So we have 19 pens of cattle here, and we have, from the very beginning, we've got feed efficiency, and so we select within a pen and try and separate out the sires, but it's still kind of a slow go. Next slide. We must utilize DNA in the profiles and the selection, the systematic culling of seed stock. I was chairman of the product enhancement subcommittee when the Carcass Merit Project was first started. In the 1980s, in addition to the banks closing out farmers and the terrible recession we were in agriculture in 1980, the beef industry was losing 18% market share to the new poultry companies that was selling poultry, and they are doing a lot of them in fast food joints and stuff like that. So anyway, and I can't give anyone credit for this. I don't remember the names, I'll put it that way. I was chairman of the product enhancement subcommittee, and someone in that subcommittee made this idea, and about half of the members of the product enhanced subcommittee was women. So I'm pretty sure it was a woman that thought this up, because I think there are several people that thought that we should spend our checkoff dollars on checkoff dollars on ads for the Super Bowl, and then some of them. This is obviously, Jenny, this obviously come from a man that said we ought to make all girls take home ec at high school and learn how to cook beef properly. And thank goodness we didn't do that. But anyway, they took coupons, and all the packers at that time, keep in mind this is 1980, agreed to do this, we would put a postage-sized card in a plastic envelope and put it in a prime rib, the prime rib cut, and it just went. We don't know whether it went to a restaurant or to Walmart or where it went. And then the person that, when they opened this out of cryovac, the person that came in and bought two steaks off of this particular prime rib, they would hand this card to them, and they would pay for the steaks, and they take it home, and then they had five things that they could check off. It was great, it was good, it was average, it was fair, or I wish I had bought chicken. And then they had to, they checked the reason they would rather, why they did, what was wrong with it. And if you can believe, well, first of all, 18% of the coupons come back, they'd rather had chicken. Isn't that ironic that that's how much market share we were losing? And so the thing that came back with those 18% was the meat was tough. The meat was tough. So we, thanks to Jerry Lipsy, who was at American Simmental Association, and John Pollock, who was at Cornell, and others, decided that we could, and James Taylor from Oklahoma, or no, gosh, he'd shoot me if I knew I said that, from Texas A&M, had taken Brahman Angus F1s and receptacles and bred them back to their own brother, and he believed that he could find SNPs. He could find SNPs for toughness. So we did this project, and it cost, I think it cost about $3 million in checkoff funds. And we would take these steaks, they would cut steaks off of these and marry it back up to the coupon that came back, because if they brought the coupon back filled out, they got 2 free steaks. So they didn't get a steak unless they filled out the thing. And that's how the Carcass Merit Project started. And of course, there was several universities that said, well, we're going to have to get some cows, and we're going to have to do this, we're going to have to do that, and it'll take us a few years to get the grant and all this. And my mother often said, Dave, patience is a virtue. Possess it if you can. Well, I can't. And so I said, we're not going to do that. So thanks to the Beef Breeds Council, all the breed association agreed to find cattle that were out of registered cattle, and find those cattle and follow them through and do a Warner-Bressler shear test on them. So we took these steaks, and then I got another thing is when we cut off the 2 bottom steaks of where the animal's graded, and then they were aged for 13 and a half days, because that's how long the average meat was being aged. And then we did an Warner-Bressler test. And then I insisted on that we also did a sensory panel on them. And tenderness is more important to a good eating experience than marbling, who's a close second. But anyway, we soon found out that an animal that was graded choice in Amarillo might just be graded select in Omaha, and they could not figure that out. And so I said, that's easy. I've judged a lot of speech contests, and you know, the local chapter, FFA chapter, gets a 90 for the first prize, and the one that wins the state gets a 92, and the one that wins the national gets a 93. And we know there's a lot more difference than that. And and then I said to another one, some of them still were shaking their head, and I looked at the men in the crowd and I said, have you ever seen an ugly woman in a bar at 2 o'clock in the morning? And everybody laughed and said, well, no, we'll do that. So we had a sensory panel on them, and that was the start. That was the start of genomics in cattle. It was a carcass merit project, and it's grown since then. And so now, what Nichols Farms is going to do, and a lot of people already are doing, is improve the metabolic efficiency of beef cows and their calves before reaching the feedlot would have a dramatic impact on decreasing the price of beef, increasing profit for the producer, and increasing per capita beef consumption. I was on the advisory board of a big research project on feed efficiency for cattle that involved Kansas State, Iowa State, I believe Nebraska, and Cornell. And the Iowa State one had the job of feeding limousine, most of them were F1s, and then limousine F1 cattle on feed efficiency with Grow Safe or whatever feed intake. Half of them were fed like the hottest ration that Iowa do, and that's 90% corn, almost no roughage, and you give them implants for growth and all the rest. And then the other half of them were fed grass that they mowed every day and fed them grass, because cattle there's no way to measure them on grass. And then they also, in the wintertime, when there wasn't grass, they reconstituted hay to have the same moisture content. And this is so dramatic, and this is this is the best news we've had in the beef industry for the last 20 years. The ranking of feed efficiency on the sires of those cattle ranked the same on the ones that were eating grass and gaining a 0.75 as their contemporaries that was gaining 4 pounds a day on straight corn. That is tremendous help. And I know at the Nichols Farms, where we've been going by relative growth with ADG, we're weaning bigger calves off of our cows on less acres every year. Now, some of this is just increased management, some of it is genetics, but I know that metabolic efficiency is lots more stuff than what happens in the rumen, and we are going to have to, and are going to have to really get serious about finding steps and so on for this metabolic efficiency. Next slide. Now, I'm glad that I got this slide in here because I watched Mark's, and so here's our little slide. These are our open heifers, and the reason I got this slide in here is because corn was $4.30 a bushel when this happened, and these are our open heifers. These are our open yearling heifers that would be about, I guess, 18 months of age. And we had 43 of them, and they were obviously out on pasture, and they weighed 932. That was the pay weight into the Gardiner feedlots. They gained 5.41 gain per head per day. Their feed conversion as dry was 5.54. So they were getting a pound of gain for a pound of grain. Now keep in mind that gain per head, and this was involved a lot of water and so on, and this feed conversion was on the dry. But that is, and we feed cattle. Ourselves, and we feed our opens and so on, and so we're getting that done on our bulls in the feedlot, or in our feed tests that are on a 40% moisture diet. It's supposed to gain about 3.5, and they're gaining close to 4. But with $4.50 corn, we made $233 a head. So that was a few years ago, but that shows what we can do with. And I don't know any data that I've seen, and perhaps Mark has some, that cattle that gain rapidly effects are markedly different than if it's put on slow. I would guess that there isn't any, but we did not sell these at great yield, Mark, or on the grid, because we was afraid, because they had such big carcasses that some of them might be called, they might have called them, they were outside the age limits. Next slide. Genomics must play a major role in identifying the good, the bad, and the ugly in female fertility and calf crop percentage. Reproductive failure is a major source of economic loss in the beef industry. The majority of this loss occurs because cows that do not become pregnant during a defined breeding season, and embryonic death plays a major role in the profit or loss in most cow herds. We have a policy at Nichols Farms, which has been in effect for 60 years, I guess, is that we never ever make excuse for a cow that loses her calf. And any cow that loses her calf, including one getting run over by the feed truck, that cow goes to market. And the reason for this is because my brother Lee and I took Dad's 400-acre farm, and we've turned that into over 5,000 acres. And we were borrowing lots of money, still are, and both of us were really impatient. And the reason was, and this goes clear back for 60 years, a cow in 1956, which is the year I graduated from high school, and by the way, won the national speech contest in FFA that year on performance testing cattle. And there was only one organization, including universities, that had a performance program at that time, was the American Shorthorn Association. And they had a booklet out that I would give a lot of money for if I could find it, that said Shorthorns are the best in every way, WEIGH. And so that's what we bid. At that time, a weigh-up cow was worth $100, and her heifer calf would be worth $115. It's still true to this day, and I'm talking from a commercial standpoint, that you can take the cow to market and get $1,000 out of her, or 900 or whatever, and you'll see that their heifer calf inside it will bring the same money. So if you're using the right bulls, why don't you trade in the cow that lost her calf? What we've done the last few years is we have been, since we started ultrasounding for pregnancy, which, by the way, the first ultrasound that was ever done in the nation was done at the Nichols farms. And another example is I was in a BIF meeting, and a gentleman from Cornell was ultrasounding pigs, and so everybody poo-pooed and said, well, there's no reason if we can't ultrasound cattle for the same one. They said, well, yeah, but we don't want to do that because the main factor in getting carcass data is to find out how they marbled. Well, my wife Phyllis, who means more to me than any other person in the world, they had just determined that she had MS. And while MS is, what MS does is, for reasons no one knows for sure, is the nerve cells in the brain where they branch off, there's a tiny, tiny bit of protein that branches those nerves off. And for some reason, the body thinks that's foreign protein and it destroys those junction boxes. So I said, you know, if they could do a X-ray of sorts, or ultrasound, I mean, if they could ultrasound her brain and go in there and see those little specks of protein, they sure as hell could see marbling. And the fact of it is that Phyllis is half German, so that proves that she's got a thick skull. And she's heard this thing so many times that it no longer, she no longer laughs at it. But anyway, we did that. No university, Iowa State, said, yeah, you do it, Nichols, if you furnish the money, we'll do it. And this is what we need to do, Mark, and this is an example of people being people. I went to the Simmental Association, which I was serving on the board of, and I got $50,000 from the Simmental Association. I got $50,000 from the Angus Association, and I got $50,000 from the Iowa Cattlemen Association, and we were off to the races. And that's how ultrasound started. And it happened here in the chute, is 10 feet from my office. And we found out that we didn't have to buy new machinery. We didn't even have to do any software, because the medicals doctors were ultrasounding people's livers, especially some of those people that lost money on the last bunch of cattle they fed and had been drinking too much, and they had cirrhosis of the liver. Because I'm sure Jenny knows what foie gras is, because she looks like the kind of person that would enjoy the finer things in life. And cirrhosis of the liver is fatty liver. So we just adopted that, and then some of you K-State guys help me out. I can't remember the guy at K-State that started doing this about the same time we did, about a year later. And anyway, that's how which has made a major difference.
He hear you say that?
What's that? He was at K-State for years, and he was doing it on feedlot cattle.
John
Breathour, what a guy. Oh, what a guy. I mean, he's about as nuts as I am. And so he got involved. So it was a K-State, Iowa State project. And we were going in, and we absolutely went in there one year. And every 28 days, we took a muscle core out of their ribeye about the size of a wood pencil. And we would make a little, I wasn't doing it, scientists would make a tiny little cut in their back and stick this probe in down till it hit the ribs, and then you gave it a half turn and you pulled the muscle core out. And then they went and just to did a ether extract score on that to see what the IMF was, intramuscular fat. And then the next 28 days, you would go do it on the other one. And I'll tell you, folks, it was as bad as dehorning. It really was. And we at that time had Solaire cattle. We were trying Solaire cattle. And I can tell you right now, them Solaire bulls, after about the second time through there, got to not liking it. And so it was kind of a real job, but we got the job done. And the first breed association to adopt it was the Angus Association, and ultimately you want to get real carcass data, but it sure has changed the percentage of choice cattle and so on that we have. And another thing for the Angus, certified Angus beef has absolutely changed the beef industry, the retail industry, because that was the first beef that it was brand name that I know about, and so now we have a lot of brand names and beef and other things, and some of the premiums we're getting, I don't think would have ever happened without CAB. Next slide. Well, I want to back up. I want to talk a little bit more about embryonic death. Can we back up a slide? Okay. No, go forward. Okay. We've got between 1,400 and 15 cows, and we AI for one cycle, and then we turn out mostly yearling and 2-year-old bulls, so that we could be turning generations. And we had a student, intern. We've had I don't know how many interns. We have several every year, but anyway, Cliff Lamb, who is now the department head at Texas A&M, was an intern at our place, and he was doing ultrasound. He wasn't doing the ultrasound, but he was running the project. And so we still to this day, we ultrasound our cows and our heifers at about 50 days after we AI them, 40 to 50 days. And we do that because we're getting 25 to 75 calves a day, and they're in pastures that we've let grow up in calving pastures, and calving in the mud and the snow in March, it was when we calve, is hard work, and it helps a whole lot if we could just sort out the cows that are up close, and then every week turn out the pairs and so on. Well, what we found that half of our open Angus cows, half of them, was due to embryonic death. The embryo was there, and it was there when we preg checked her, but she didn't take it. She was open in the fall. Our Simmentals they were about they were more like a third of their opens were embryonic death. And here's the good news. Here's the good news. The F1 Simmental Angus, which we sell more of than any other outfit in the country, with EBDs, by the way, guys, it was 0. The F1s was 0, and their parents, both the Simmentals and the Angus, were having embryonic death. The Angus Association finally has decided to do this, and they have developed a test which is going to become available in October or November, that we can test our cattle genomically for haplotypes. The Holstein breed, 60% of their AI bulls have one of 4 haplotypes, and it's just the way it is in the cattle business. And we're seeing in the whole beef industry that we have cows that are not lasting as long or having as many calves. And one of the best things we can do is 10% of our Angus cattle, purebred Angus, and about 11% of our purebred Simmentals cows are 10 years old or older. And every cow at Nichols Farms has a calf every year, once a year, every year, or else she's between 2 slices of bread. And so I think this is something that a great opportunity that we've got in the cattle business is make that cow last longer, make her eat less, and have her problem free. And I tell people, you know, if you're having the relatives over for Thanksgiving dinner, and you find out the stool in the bathroom is plugged up, and the third plumber you call answers his phone and says, yes, he can come over and unclog it. Do you ever ask him how much he's going to charge? Never. And so getting rid of problems pay dividends even faster than do the increase in value. They really do. Is because what has happened in corn is when we have Roundup Ready beans and Roundup Ready corn, we have corn that kills its rootworms, it kills other insects, and so we're planting corn and beans that have GMOs in them, so we don't have those problems, and we don't have to cultivate them, and we don't have to do all those things we hate to do. And so trouble-free cows that live longer, with big calves, is, I think, the next place the cattle industry is going to go to find some real efficiency. Next slide. This is an old slide, obviously. Change from a supply-driven market to a demand-driven market. In the United States, we're spending 10.4% of we can increase beef by 10% in the future. That's what it's going to grow. In China, the market is there for 49%. Japan is 9%, South Korea 25%, but in the whole world, is that the daily calories per person for meat consumption is 60%. So anyway, that's I really believe this. That we're going to have more troubles with supply in the world than we are with having to produce so much. Now, one of the things that is a bit frightening to me is we have foreign companies that own a pretty big chunk of the swine industry, including the houses, the pigs, and the packing houses. Same thing has happened in the dairy business, especially in the West Coast. So I think because of organizations like this one and so on, is how we will stop that. We won't stop at how we can outperform, because a team effort will beat an individual every time. And so one of the things that I got from Mark's presentation, which I was pleased, was They believe in teamwork and they believe in people, and so do we. So next slide. The future's in our hands, and it's up to us. Bovine resistance to disease, metabolic efficiency, residual feed intake, healthfulness of beef for humans. I was on a committee that was Iowa State was doing, that was measuring the omega-3 in beef, and they found some beef animals that had were the same as eating salmon. And while this wouldn't be a food that everybody would want, it would still be one that would be good for people that really were concerned about eating too much cholesterol, or it'd just be a good deal for people would think it was a good deal. And then we got to have genetic problem solving. Is don't try and solve these things by putting on some additional spray or feed them this or feed them that. Let's solve it genetically, because I think we can. So the future is in our hands. Next slide. Smart people told Columbus the world was flat. He did not insist it was round. He got in the boat. And that's what if there's one message that I can tell you people that are watching this, because you obviously are the elite among the cattle business, and inquisitive, or you wouldn't be watching this. Folks, it's time to get in the boat. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Nichols. I tell you what, it's kind of an honor to have you joining us on our Cattle U. And we just really appreciate you coming on, and we're sorry we couldn't do this in person, but I tell you what, now's our time to pick your brain, because it's rare that we get to have living legends in the room with us. So folks, if you'd like to pick Mr. Nichols' brain, be sure to click on the chat and send us those questions, and we'll share those here. So Mr. Nichols, let's talk about how genomics might help us connect to the consumer, because we have a lot of talking about we need to really reach that market. How can we make sure that with our genomics we make the best and ideal product that the consumer actually wants, whether domestic or abroad?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because we've got this tool that's been available for several years that we can get genomic answers to tenderness of beef. And we know tenderness of beef is the #1 reason people have a bad eating experience. And all of us here, admit it, all of us here has had a steak that is tough. We've always had it, and a lot of times that tough ones has got kind of a liver aftertaste. And I detested liver since I was old enough to eat. And when my mom made me eat liver, I would kind of look out the window, and when she looked up to look out the window, I'd cut a piece of liver off and put it in my pocket, because she made me clean out my plate. So after that, I had all the liver in my pocket, and she finally caught me, because when I went outside, the dog come running and sniffed my pocket. And so that my liver days was over. But we have got this. The Simmental Association has really adopted this, and they give us ratings on tenderness. It is so accurate. It is so accurate that you don't even need to have a Warner Brasler shear test anymore. It really is that accurate. The Angus Association, who's in the meat business they test for it, but they don't even put it on their pedigrees. And so I think that, and it's a threshold trait of the samples we took, and all of these samples we took in this test for tenderness were out of registered Angus bulls and registered Simmentals and so on. And the breed execs chose the bulls, and I suggested to them, because that's a kind of a thankless job to be a breed exec, that they simply should furnish semen out of the bulls that were registered the most calves. So it was not a subjective deal. Well, anyway, that's what they did. Well, the Simmental Association prints it all. There's a tenderness, a genomic test for it on that. And the #1 selling semen bull in the Simmental breed for 8 years named was Shear Force. And that was because Shear Force was extremely tender. Now, the stakes that we did in the Carcass Merit Project, there was 3, and in Herefords and Shorthorns, it was about 3% of them was tough. Angus was between 4 and 5. The Charolais and Simmentals was in there was 6 or 7, and so on. Now, this is a threshold trait, and I tell this to my Angus friends, including the good people at CAB, that we need to have Angus breeders selected for us. We're in the meat business. My God, folks, we're in the meat business, and we do this test anyway, and it's there, but it isn't published to us. And they say, well, it's only 3%, and I just say, hey, if 3% of the airplanes crashed on takeoff, how many of you would have flown a plane down here? And when you get a tough CAB steak that you gave $20 for, and it's tough, that is crashing on takeoff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. We've got a question from the audience. Dave, with all of your experience, how do you recommend we get along better as a cattle family and quit fighting amongst ourselves? And you served on the board of many breed organizations, and you've been around a lot of different segments of the industry. So, any advice there?
I just am so totally frustrated by it that we're all in this together, and we don't do what Merrill Nichols and Henry Gardiner did. Is, by golly, if you want something done, do it yourself. And both of them, both my dad Merrill and Henry Gardiner, they not only practiced what they preached what they practiced. Mm-hmm. They preached what they practiced. They know, and I know they were good Christians and so on, but they wanted everybody else to enjoy the same benefits out of it. Where now we have them want to patent it. They want to patent it and don't let anybody else use it. So I just think that we have to start acting like Americans again. And today, by the way, today is the anniversary of the 9/11 flight. And I was listening to a lady on television this morning that said that she lived in Westchester, and she was at work, and they called her and said, get home right away. There's a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. And everybody in Westchester, instead of trying to drive into New York City, they had these huge parking lots where they got on the train. And she said she didn't realize for 3 or 4 days that after 9/11, the parking lot still had cars in them. Still had cars in them. And that was a time in America's history that I thought was a highlight of America. And I'm really, really concerned about and my parents my parents and your parents, the greatest generation there ever was. I guarantee you, when they were in America, they carried the American flag.
Amen, sir. Amen. Well, as we wrap this up, on a better note, sir, what's been the one thing in all of your years that you've seen as a cattleman that you thought, you know what, this is tremendous. This is absolutely, this is going to revolutionize the industry. And maybe it's the advancements of marketing to consumers that we saw after the beef checkoff. Maybe it's the genetic enhancement that we're seeing on the producer's side. Maybe it's just the rising quality of the product that we've seen on the plates of our diners. What's one thing that you look back on and you go, that was a turning point right there?
Okay, I'm gonna talk about two turning points.
All right.
I'm gonna talk about two turning points. My dad did not have any cows. He did not have any cows. He didn't buy bulls. He had been in the purebred business. He raised hogs and fed cattle, and he bought them cheap and he fed them good and watched the market. Well, anyway, in Adair County, Iowa, which was the second leading county in Iowa for both cows and for cattle fed for years ago, when I was about 12 years old, no, I was about 10 years old, I had grand champion steer at the county fair. In Adair County, the greatest thing that could happen to an Adair County farmer was if his son had grand champion steer at the fair. Because we'd have between 300 to 400 steers at the county fair. If you could have champion and steer at the county fair, that was the best thing that could happen to him. The second best thing that could happen to him was if his daughter had champion at the county fair. And then the worst thing that could, and the third best thing that could happen to him, if he had a full ride scholarship to Iowa State to be on the judging teams, which they were in the 60s. The judging teams got full ride scholarships. Well, anyway, I had champion steer at the county fair, and then I had a reserve champion a year or two later. And I came home and I told my dad and Bob that I wanted to get a purebred Angus heifer so I could show at the county fair, because if I had to prove that purebred heifer, there would not be any starving children in China. And so the real reason is I noticed that the girls that were showing purebred Angus heifers were wearing tighter jeans that were a lot more attractive than the girls that were showing steers, and way more attractive than the girls that showed pigs. So I thought if I could get that Angus heifer, I maybe could get some action at the tie-out. So anyway, they pretend like they believed me. And so I went and bought a heifer, bought two heifers in fact, and Dad went with me and he helped me pick them out, and the cattle were just terribly cheap. I think it was 51, really cheap. And then he bought a whole herd of Angus, and they embarrassed me. They were old Earl Marshall and old Bellboy cattle that were, weighed probably, the cows weighed 1,000 to 1,200, where the show cattle they weighed 6 to 8. And anyway, she was champion at the county fair. Didn't get any action at the tie-out, but I got my name in the paper and a picture above the fold. And then this capper had her calf, and this calf wasn't growing quite right. And then his forehead starts bulging. And the feed salesman says it's definitely a lack of vitamin A. The vet said, well, I think it's probably because she ate a weed that it contained some kind of poison. And then finally, we called the Angus fieldman. And he came out and looked at her, and he took one look at the calf, and his face turned white, and he said, knock the calf in the head, bury him, don't tell anybody you have him. And that's all he'd say. So we didn't do that. We called the local extension director, who had flown over 100 missions over Germany in World War II. And a wing is 6 planes. 6 bombers would go out, 5 would come back. He did 100 missions. And man, and he said he wouldn't even make friends with anybody because you knew you're going to lose them. Well, he took me up, drove me up in his car, and I met Dr. Jay Lush at Iowa State as a 14-year-old boy. And Dr. Jay Lush, who is to genetics what Einstein is to physics. That's Jay Lush. And I'll bet you cannot find a geneticist today that doesn't go trace back to somebody that taught Jay Lush. And he taught me about a simple autosomal recessive for a starter dwarf. And he stirred in me a passion to learn and to learn about science. And then he told me that I should by that time I had 4 or 5 cows. He said I should breed them, and I had a bull. Dad had 4, which I wouldn't even let cattle run with mine. And so he said, test your cattle, where I breed them to their own daughters for starter dwarfism. We had 4 bulls. My bull and Dad's 4 bulls. Keep in mind, this is in the mid-60s. All 3 of the clean pedigreed Angus bulls had dwarf calves. The only bull out of the 5 that did not have dwarf calves was a bull that was sired by a bull that was notorious, that everybody knew sires. Because the only way you could find out these things in the 60s was there's only 2 people that always tell the truth. That's a kid and a drunk. So after the shows, you could go to the bar and people, when they got drunk enough, would tell you about which ones had it. So this tells you what the Henry Gardiners and Dave Nichols and Merrill Nicholses did. Dad says, we're going to use a dirty pedigreed bull that's clean, and we're going to slaughter the other ones. And we did. He said, I just want to raise feeder cattle anyway. Well, you know, I wanted to sell bulls. So I put an ad in my 3 bulls and said that one of mine and 2 of my dad's, because he let me keep 3 bulls. And I went to the local newspaper and I did a display ad, because I wasn't going to have any want ad, that we had for sale 3 bulls that were guaranteed not to sire dwarfs. Most people didn't even know what the mode of inheritance was, and not red. That day, when that paper came out on a Thursday, our yard never had sold a bull in their life. Yard filled full of pickups and cars and trucks of people that wanted to buy a bull that would not sire dwarfs. And I knew that was because of my great ad. What I found out several years later, and never ever told me, but I regret it to this day. The reason the yard was full of cars is because the ad said Merrill, Nichols, and Sons. And whatever Merrill Nichols said that was what it was. And so I think that that's what and so that's what we've led our whole life around, is that you build a better mousetrap and they will buy it. And if you screw them or lie to them, they'll never do business with you again, and shouldn't. And so I think we've got to honestly come together as a team and say, hey, let's let the whole world enjoy the luxuries that we do with really good beef, and let's really make sure it's really healthy and good for them, which we know it is.
There you go. There you go. Well, Mr. Nichols, thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I could sit and talk with you all day, but we've got to get going. And we want to say thank you to you, sir. Thank you to Rick Pfortmiller and Mark Gardiner. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your insights for the tailgate talk, even though it was virtual. We want to also thank our session sponsor, Neogen, and our speaker sponsors, Select Sires and C-Lock, and all of our tremendous sponsors for our virtual Cattle U. Folks, we couldn't put stuff like this on without our great sponsors. Remember,
Jennifer,
yes, sir.
Jennifer, I think both I and Mark need to give you thanks for teaching us how to run this thing. Run Zoom. I'm sure Mark can agree with me.
It is our extreme pleasure. You know what? We are all learning as we go through this. As my dad says, you learn, you adapt, you thrive, and you survive. So we hit all four. Well, remember, folks, you will get if you like this format, or if there's something different that we can do, all registered attendees will receive a survey in your email boxes. If you fill those out, that helps us create a better experience for you in the future, whether we're virtual or live like we're hoping for in July of 2021. So thank you for filling those out, and thank you for joining us. On behalf of all of us here at High Plains Journal, all of our speakers and our great sponsors, thank you for riding with us, and we will see you on the trail. Bye now.
Bye.
Dirt road in a gooseneck, saddle up with me. Dry land in God's country, crops far as I can see. Headlights